Hello, everyone, and good evening. I am your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution podcast. If you're new to the channel, please hit like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell as we're constantly adding new shows and cross streams all the time. Please check out the latest video essay, Welcome to the Terror Dome, and also the recap show that Pascal and I did, commenting on the essay. And if you haven't got a chance, also read the accompanying piece in Sublation magazine. They did change the title on me. I did want the title to also be Welcome to the Terror Dome. Also, don't forget, for those of you that are patrons, tomorrow night is movie night. And I got to pick the movie this time, and we will be watching Hollywood Shuffle, partially because I'm working on a video essay about the second wave of blaxploitation. And one thing I like about movie night is after we watch the film, because we watch it on Discord, we all watch it together and like we can see each other. It's actually really fun. We have a conversation, and the conversation we had last month after the Free State of Jones was a really good talk. I actually really dug it, and I like that movie a lot too. So Pascal will be here tomorrow night to join us on movie night. And if you want to watch the movie and you're not a patron, become a patron. It's extremely easy. For as little as $30, you can pay for the entire year, and you have access to all the champagne room, which is now a call-in show. I shouldn't say call-in only. It's a call-in show. So after the first hour tonight, we're going to the champagne room. Phone lines are already up for you guys. Call in, and you can comment on some of the topics you heard today, or whatever you want to talk about. I'm here for it. We're here for it. And before we bring in our guests, I was reading an interesting article. I actually thought of one of our guests today, Derick Varn, one of our past guests I was actually recently talking to the other day, Catherine Liu. I was reading an article dealing with some of the after effects of the Great Resignation. And it was about the possible end of middle management, or something that, Derick was probably, I guarantee he'll have at least a couple words to say about this. The end of the PMC, the professional managerial class. Yes, some businesses are finding that with so many employees working remotely, they no longer need the office hall monitor or middle manager. Middle managers make up about 17.6% of the U.S. workforce, according to a 2016 Harvard Business Review study. Companies like the one where you can find some of my writings, Medium, have chosen to go the holacracy route. What is holacracy, you say? Holacracy is a non-hierarchical, I said it right, structure. It's built around overlapping circles instead of top-down hierarchies. Manager titles are eliminated and managerial responsibilities are distributed among various staff members. While holacracy may seem like it creates a more democratic workplace, critics feel it really doesn't. It simply changes certain titles like manager to leader and adds some administration roles to people that didn't have them before. But one thing it does do is allow companies to lay off salary-heavy dead weight and give more responsibility without having to increase wages, under the guise of creating a more equitable workspace and adding to a positive live-work balance. Got to love capitalism. With that being said, let's bring in our dream team of news correspondents. And I want to, before I even bring these guys on, I want to thank them so much for agreeing to do this. It's really hard to not have Kuba and Pascal. Those guys needed a break. And I find it, I hate to say the word blessing, but it's a blessing to be able to reach out to these people and have them say, sure, no problem. So coming all the way live from a mysterious office in the Boston metro area is everyone's favorite sociologist, Zine Magubane.
Hi. Good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Being
Oh, so much.
favorite sociologist. Yeah.
I have a favorite. Lots of things. You'll be surprised.
I think relatively few people have a favorite sociologist, but if I can occupy that space, I won't refuse it.
If I could collect you people like baseball cards, I would. And I do in my mind. Just know that. I'm being serious, and that's the sad part. And also, you know him as the mouth from the South, but this isn't Jimmy Hart. Some of you call him Talcum X, and I don't appreciate it. Some of you call him the Black Sean King, but I'm here for that. He is Pascal's favorite alabaster leftist. And he's someone I'm proud to call a friend. C. Derick Varn.
Hi.
Sorry, Varn. I've been watching way too many wrestling documentaries and crying. I've been crying through wrestling documentaries, and it's a bad look.
Have you been watching stuff about Roddy Piper? Is that what's been getting you? Or?
The Hart Foundation. I didn't realize Jimmy Snuka killed his girlfriend. Oh man, every wrestler I loved growing up is a horrible person with a bad drug problem, and they're usually pretty abusive, and sometimes they're murderers. The more you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you wouldn't expect people who have to fake traumatic injuries and thus get traumatically injured to occasionally take micro brain injuries and kill people at all. You know, that's not something that's predictable or anything.
So there's so many. There was a story that they told, and I feel so bad for Zine having to deal with the capitalist realism of my youth. But there was a wrestler who was notorious for literally, they cut themselves. They used to cut themselves to bleed. That was like a big thing. And you see some of the ones that are alive now, their heads are just, it looks like an old orange. It's just like so just ravaged with all these cuts. And I guess this one wrestler, before the WWF became what it was areas they wrestled in, not districts, I forget what they call them, territories. And there was one guy that controlled Puerto Rico. And I guess that was a big time territory. And they killed this one wrestler, just killed him.
Yep.
Killed him, like stabbed him in front of stabbed him, killed him. And I was like, what?
Yeah, there's a Mountain Goat song about that, believe it or not. But
is it really?
Yeah, there is.
It's so much of it is just kind of mind blowing because it's not even about the whole kayfabe aspect of it. Like we're telling you about the pre-done outcomes. Like forget that. This is just the job itself, what it entails, the kind of abuse they put themselves through, and
So very quick funny story. I don't want to get too much of your time with this, but one of my best friends in high school, he was the son of Black Jack Garrett, who was a minor regional wrestler for the South. Mm-hmm. And if you did this in the 70s, like there wasn't anything for you when you quit. Like, so like he was like a shop foreman in Central Georgia. You know, that was his fate. And he actually was glad that he got out because like the damage they did to their body was severe. And he would show me like how I was completely uninterested in wrestling because he would tell me like, oh yeah, not only is it fake, but like we have razors in our hands all the time and we're cutting ourselves. And I'm just like, ew. Yeah.
The one that got me the most, where I was just kind of a weeping person, was one wrestler, Owen Hart. I guess he was the last of all those Hart children to wrestle, and he was technically good, but he was coming up in the era of the what do they call it, the Attitude Era. And every time they would give him a character, they have writers for this. I didn't realize they have writers. And when they would give him a character to play, he'd be like, well, that would embarrass my family. This would make my wife look bad if I'm cheating on my wife. Like, I have children, I can't. And so he wouldn't play these roles. So finally, like, I'll just make you this stupid character. And so his whole thing was his family would videotape him all the time. And when they're interviewing his kids now, his son, they're asking his son, like, oh, what was it like growing up with your father? He goes, I had the greatest childhood ever because my parents were the most in love people and my father was the greatest dad. And I'm like, oh, wow. But he died. They had a stunt gone wrong and he was supposed to descend from the top of the arena and they had the wrong hook on him. And he instantly fell and died. And yeah. And his family will have nothing to do with wrestling, his wife and children, and they won't allow the WWE to induct him in the Hall of Fame. But I guess what the family's done with their money is build houses for single moms because they felt the WWE left them destitute. And they're like, we put our father's name on that. You're not allowed to put our father's name on your wrestling. I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting.
Cool.
But enough of this wrestling talk. Let's we're gonna start off with Zine because she's got the heaviest topic. She wants to go for it. You know, she could have talked about. She goes, "Is there any, I can talk about?" I was like, "You can talk about anything." I kind of want to. This is what she said. She says, "There's been a lot of talk about the epidemic of mental health crises among school-age kids. I love to talk about that from a class perspective, along with a general discussion about parenting."
Well, you got to talk about what you know.
Well, I will cede the floor to you.
Okay. And how long do you want me to drone on for? Because, as a sociologist, I can drone on for a long time.
Well, now you get to drone on with Derick and I, and Derick will probably have some smart guy questions, and I just have sound effects.
Oh,
Derick is a teacher, so I might actually have some questions. Yeah.
I'm sure you're going to have some questions.
Well, it's not like I'm a particular expert on mental health or anything like that, but as a mother and Marxist and sociologist who lived through the pandemic and its aftermath, and could not help noticing the proliferation of articles, everything from the New York Times to the Atlantic, about how, women are breaking down during the pandemic, especially, and the aftermath, and now how kids are really, spinning out lots of school fights, an epidemic of depression, a lot of student disengagement that teachers are talking about as well, both in the, K through 12, and as a college professor, I see it a lot. And what I notice is the kind of shop-worn way of talking about it, that, as is the tendency in America, that tends to look at a big social problem and offer solutions that either bypass class entirely, like they will blame it on social media use, for example, video games, lack of parental engagement, the usual ways that actually tends to fall solely on parents as responsible for whatever is happening to their kids. And I think it became really acute during the pandemic about what it is like to raise a kid, to have a family in a country that has so devalued public goods. It's kind of interesting, that link with the wrestler that you talked about, that experience of poverty led them to decide that their legacy was building houses for single mothers, right? And, when you look at, really what is happening amongst kids in the United States, it's just become so clear to me that this experience of, raising new humans, raising humans, it is one of those practices, for lack of a better word. It is fundamental to keeping society going, but it can only be done with help from the collective. And the experience of, raising kids in the United States that I have found is that every aspect of kids' lives is subject to market imperatives, right?
Mhm.
So your kid wants to play sports. I have 3 boys, very active in sports. And what becomes so clear to you is that even to engage in collective practices like play, involves both such a high financial commitment, but also every aspect of it, in addition to the fact that you have to pay for it as a parent, every aspect of it is subject to, market imperatives in ways that I feel like are, profoundly alienating for kids and parents, right? So kind of what you saw in the pandemic as well, it's like even though schools were, increasingly being defunded, right? You actually brought to me into sharp relief, like schools were playing such a strong role in like the welfare of the social good. Like it was the place that many kids not only went to be fed, but again, given our extended working hours, right? It sort of functions half as a place of learning, but also as like a place where kids have to be put in order for parents to work crazy amounts of hours. And really, like, again, like what I saw, during the pandemic was both this being sharp relief, like the shredding of the social fabric and the shredding of any sort of um, support of any kind that is so necessary for the raising of kids. And at the same time, as all of that falls away, and like you're supposed to do it individually as a parent, all of it. And as well, in a society where there's like, you know, as we've seen, no ability to access any sort of mental health relief. Like so many, even psychiatrists and things don't take insurance at all, right? Which I think has also been like so profoundly thrown into relief in the time that we're living in. And yet, any discussion of that, um, what I noticed was like there was no talk about it. Was like all of this is falling on mothers became a sexism problem instead of a collective goods problem, right? Why aren't husbands doing more at home, right? Of course, whatever you can argue about the division of housework and all of that, but it completely bypassed why are so many things like why is the day structured, for example, around your working life, and you are solely a worker with no acknowledgement that most people belong to units, right? That they have caregiving responsibilities for people in those units, the older people, parents and so forth, but also the younger people. And again, it just sort of became like, well, ask your spouse or your partner to do more rather than ask the state to do more, right? Like, why does the school shut down at 3? It cannot be an extended place for, children to just be. So those are just some of the thoughts I've been having. Like any discussion about, children, families, parenting always bypasses any sort of notion about like how has our complete, privatization of everything worked to really like shred, a unit that necessarily has to be collective in some way, a family.
Let me bring Derick Varn in for this because Derick, you teach in a public school, if I'm not
I,
mistaken.
I do, although not in a traditional public school anymore. I work for a public online program, but actually, I mean, it's something that we've really seen with the class divisions. There's a lot of focus on racial differences in our demographics, but the largest predictor of problems is going to be the income bracket that the student's in. And while what we saw during the pandemic here, and I have to be careful how I talk about this for very clear reasons, but we've had a rash of suicidal ideation, a rash of downwardly mobile middle income families where there were murder suicides. Like that's happened more than once. And it hasn't really been talked about as a class issue at all. And it's really frustrating actually, because out here in the Mountain West, we have the phenomenon of like land speculating Mormons. And so we have people who have stay at home mothers, but they can do that because of basically luck with the property values, particularly in the last 10 years here. And the entire school system out here is kind of set up with that assumption, even more than the rest of the country, and it's bad in general. I've taught in the South too. It's been kind of a nightmare to deal with because they're like, we'll get more parents involved. I'm like, well, PTA is at like 1:30 in the afternoon. Like, I can't even go. Like,
yeah.
it's like, like, and I don't have kids. I'm just a teacher. So but you're having it when I work. And we've had tons of issues like that. And just a lot of assumptions that the community, aka the parents, aka the mothers, would pick it up. But conversely, like, the men in these families are working and they aren't really available either. So it's been kind of, my experience totally comports with this. We've had a lot of stuff where, like, I teach a pretty heavily Latin community too, and we've had a lot of stuff with truancy issues, and then people just like disappearing because they're moving around for work, and we're like, we'll get the families in here, and I'm like, what are we gonna do? Like, we don't have work for them. And then the last bit of that actually is it's affecting the school system. And the third way is our property values have increased so much that families are completely pushed out of the city. So even though we're one of the few states with a above replacement level birth rate, but we're still having to close schools because it's too expensive for families to live anywhere.
Wow.
Like, and a lot of these families came out here because they were pushed out of California and Arizona, and so now they're getting pushed out of here. It's increasingly not clear where they're going to go either. So, yeah, my experience just backs this up, sadly.
Andy Williams says the internet creates a hyper neoliberal expectation economy, and if you don't meet said expectations, you self-destruct. I've actually been thinking about that a lot, Andy, and I was talking to Zine about this before we came on, and I was talking to Tere about this earlier this morning. I live in one of the most violent countries in the world. Our homicide rate definitely doubles that of America. There are acts of violence that some people may call random, but it's definitely way more calculated than we see here. And I don't necessarily want to get into the the differences of murder. Murder is murder. That being said, one thing that friends of mine that do have children here, they go to school here, actually, they're never worried about a school shooting. They're never worried about a shooting in a grocery store. They're never worried about a house of worship being shot up. Why do you guys think that is? I'm only about 40 plus miles away from the border, the imaginary line. Guns, while we may not have gun stores here, getting a gun in is not very difficult. No. People definitely have.
Getting a machine gun in is not very difficult.
Yeah.
I lived in Mexico, I know. Like,
you know what I'm talking about. Like, like, we can't use them. Well, you can't buy guns. They're like, yeah, you can't buy them, but everybody I know has one. So
I mean, occasionally people have tanks. Like, I'm not even joking. But yeah, I mean, but Mexico has actually a similar gun laws to Canada, but it doesn't matter. But as far as the other, I think about it a lot. I'm a teacher. On one hand, I statistically know that even as bad as it is, most of my students will never have to face that. And a lot of what we do to I honestly kind of detest the drills and stuff we do because we traumatize the kids. And frankly, we've done the same drills for 10 years. If there was a shooter at this point, they know what we're going to do. They've all gone through the system and done the drills. It's I was actually like, yeah, I probably wouldn't actually do what you're telling me to do in an actual live shooting situation. And I live in Utah, where you can concealed carry on campus, which is true facts. Actually, I can't break up a fight, but because I have a concealed carry permit, I don't own a gun anymore, but I do have a concealed carry permit. I could carry a gun to work, but I can't break up a fight. Not that I should be breaking up fights, because horrible things happen to kids when we do that. But like, that's absurd to me. Like, that I could bring lethal force to my job and be fairly indemnified if I used it. But I can't stop kids from beating each other.
What is your take on that, Zine?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those times. I mean, look, my PhD is in sociology, not psychology or what have you. But I just noticed that even when people talk about depression, they don't also talk about alienation, right? Like, there are very sad people have been sad since time began, profoundly sad. But what I think we're actually seeing is well captured by the concept of alienation, right? Like, people are profoundly alienated from the social whole, right? Which is in shreds. They're profoundly alienated because of precisely what you talked about, that so much of life in a capitalist society is just performance and theater, right? Like the theater of the drill, the theater of all of it. And children are also not stupid, and they are watching this thing happen. Like all people, they also are not given adequate explanations, like an adequate explanatory framework to even name what they're going through or provide some sort of coherent explanation. So when I see, again, lots of levels of disengagement, right? And you see it across all levels of class, as sociologists like to think of it, which is just like income stratification sort of things, right? I mean, you see it a great deal in the professional managerial class children as well. Not to weep tears for the PMC, but I think you can weep tears for their kids, because it's a profoundly alienating experience. And since children spend a lot of their time in schools whose imperatives are also like so driven by the market, right? Property values drive, and housing values go together, right? What's the first thing a real estate agent tells you? The schools are great. And the schools are not to be great to be edifying to children. They're great in the, whatever ways, like scaling the class hierarchy, great, or whatever. But again, it is a mechanism for driving up property values rather than education having any sort of intrinsic value. And then when kids are in these, their definition of great for schools, a lot of the time, at least in a place like where I live, is things like test scores. So again, and even children see this theater of, we never get breakfast at school. Like, the whole day structured that your human needs must take a back seat to a time clock. And that's what I actually see schools as the mechanism for making sure you do. You don't eat when you want to eat. You don't actually, there is not sufficient time in most households, right? Whether professional managerial class or working class or poor, to get some food in your body of a decent nature. Go into school, no decent food. And they do this in Europe, actually. Like, children have a solid breakfast and lunch. But what also kids notice, to circle back to how kids realize the theater, the days that they're fed are the days where they take the standardized tests that are the markers for a good school to drive up property values. Children see this. They are well aware. And wouldn't you also become disengaged from something like that? I mean, it's a normal human response. And it's, again, you're alienated from this thing that, the purpose of which is should be to develop you as a human. And again, they know that mostly the purpose of school is to drive you towards a job.
That's actually really also too what's sad is the idea that like sports. Someone was also talking about this sports and just many extracurricular activities. I often talk about this with music, especially when we talk about the evolution of certain black genres of music.
Mhm.
And if you look at some of the younger musicians that play kind of this interesting fusion of jazz, R&B, funk, hip hop, guys like Thundercat, and there's another guy, I can't think of his name right now, that plays the drums and sings. Can't think of his name for the life of me. Saw him at Coachella a few years back. And Anderson .Paak. These guys come from a little bit of money because you have to pay for instruments.
Yep.
It's no longer like bands like Confunction and Earth, Wind and Fire, where they were given instruments at school. They learned how to play them. They formed bands in junior high and high school. And there were places for them to play and stuff like that. So sports is an extracurricular thing that's extremely expensive. And now, even if you look at, we're seeing it more in the NBA now. It's started to matriculate to the NFL, and definitely it's been happening in baseball for forever. Is I'm a sports fan, and I like the Golden State Warriors, being from the Bay Area. I believe 3 or 4 of their starting 5 all had dads that played in the NBA. And that's becoming more and more. If your dad didn't play in the NBA, your dad played at a very high level. Your parents had to be able to pay for you to go get the training, because you need high level specified training. Hoop dreams, you leave that in the 90s. There ain't no more, working your way up from nothing. And now we're also seeing Catholic schools, again, private schools, become these centers of where all the top level athletes go, because they can afford to take on kids, give scholarships if they need to. But generally, there's a certain it's almost like Europe now, where you're getting a class of athlete.
And even then, the whole idea is that sports is for a purpose instead of for play. And every child psychologist will tell you that just playing is important. But then now the focus is again on doing it like a job,
Mhm.
right? So even just you do an instrument for just for fun.
Mhm.
Everything must be done like a job. And so again, you see this high level of disengagement on the part of a kid, because they recognize if they're not good at it or it doesn't serve a purpose, why bother? And again, it's very much driven by adult imperatives, right? I used to be kind of anti video games until I read this article where somebody explained that actually those like live action, like it is an area away from adult supervision,
Mhm.
right? And away from adults setting the rules, you having to do it in the adult way. Because even if you're playing on one of these soccer leagues like my kids do, they're not allowed to talk and socialize during the time. You're supposed to be doing the drills. You see, so the sports that you pay for, they're not play. You're not playing. And that really, I think, does a profound damage to, a person's development as a person. Children need play, and there is no space for play in our contemporary society.
What do you say, Derek?
I would say it's even probably worse than that, to be honest. Increasingly, club sports are replacing high school sports,
Exactly.
and the high schools are using the clubs. And unlike in Latin America and places where club sports are cheap or free, actually. So in soccer here, and is a big sport here in the Mountain West. If you don't play club, you can't get on the high school team. The prior junior varsity team is not even worth it. And if you and you really need to play both, which means you have to have the time, the capacity, and the money. And we're talking levels of money that I don't think people realize. Like the school fees for it are now. Yes, we have to. I got actually. This is about to be a rant because I know some things about educational law, where we're supposed to waive the fees for the poor, but we can't charge other people for that, and we can't. So what we increasingly do is push it out of the system entirely, because it's not funded by the state either. at least not here in Utah. And so we'll set aside from like land trust funds for it. And then you see what the if you're a cheerleader or soccer or football, your kit is going to cost you about $2,000 in public school, and then if you're doing club, add about $3,000 to $4,000 that. So that's all bad. We've cut most of our art stuff down to very elite things. And again, you need to buy your own equipment. And if you're going to be competitive, you pretty much can't do it off of what you're going to get in a public school. And so you've seen this, and this goes all the way up. I'm a writer as well. When I hear about how many people have to work for free or do interns for free, I'm like, there's no way I could have done that. My background is like, my mother became a nurse when I was 20. And she was a Huddle House waitress before that. My dad was a mechanic, not a poor one, but you're still in the lower middle class with that, with several children in the household. I was talking to someone the other day about how, like, when people say Roseanne is a working class sitcom, and I'm like, yeah, but that house is still 3 times too big. To be perfectly frank. So when I think about that, most of my students who are poor, unless they're amazing, are shut out of that. If they're amazing, someone might fund them for a little while. But then they're likely to be sold a good that they're going to go professional. And that's almost never going to happen. The statistics of that are so low. And so a lot of kids are even fed a bill of goods that the sports are going to get them out, and they're not. And that also infuriates me because, one, like, we should be like in high school, for example, there is no unstructured break time.
Exactly.
There's none.
None.
Like there's like 2 play at times when you can go to the bathroom with an additional 5 minutes. There's lunch, which is increasingly controlled. There's fewer and fewer electives because they're too expensive. I mean, you might have one art teacher for 3 or 4 schools.
That's a good point.
So, and in my state, we've cut things down to the point that, like, most core classes are up to 45 students a class. So there's just no, so there's no real viability to it. And the students have lost faith. I mean, across the board, they'll just tell you outright they've lost faith. Even the kind of sociologically upper middle class students. And I have to also specify, because when I talk as a Marxist, I use class differently than when I talk as an educator. But that they also don't think there's much of a future to them, and they don't even know what the schools are looking for anymore. Like, okay, so we have ended a lot of the mandatory testing in some of the states. Kind of. They're still asked to do the test, but now the tests are just for the schools to figure out how we rank our property values. They're not even for them to get into college. And so they don't know how to get into school. And I've been getting, part of my job has been trying to help poor kids get into better schools, for a long time. It's my own story. And I don't know how to tell them how to do it anymore either, except already have money.
I mean, that hurts the soul, man. I mean, this conversation is not, I knew it wasn't going to be cheery. Yeah. Both of you guys would tell me what you wanted to talk about, but I didn't know we were going to go down such a dark rabbit hole. As a parent of a couple, there's a couple school age kids. There's a 15-year-old and a 3-year-old left. It is very sad. Like, but I'm finally at a point in my own life where I can do things now for fun. And I'm telling my friends now, hey, you're not going to write the greatest album in the world that people are going to care about in your 40s. Just do it because you want to do it, and you're going to have way more fun. Like, and let your kids know it's okay to have fun.
Well, the interesting thing, I feel like it feels sad and dark because it feels like it's hopeless and there's no way out of it, right? But of course, we know there is a way out of it. And when we think about like, how do you get more people interested in class politics, right? Like, you know, when I think if people understood that so many of their private struggles, whether you are in the professional managerial class or you are working class or poor, because to link to the other comment about the club sports, right? It is also heavily resting on a great expenditure of parental time to drive to places, to go to very, very far fields, which I discovered are placed where they are because the fields themselves are a revenue generating enterprise. So it is not that your kid practices at the field down the street from their house. They're often tied to whatever club they're in. So you're driving these very long distances after a very long day at work. If you are not in the PMC, where you can to some degree control your hours of work, it's just out, right? Right. It assumes a full free Saturday, a full free Sunday, that you can leave work at these odd times. It assumes a PMC lifestyle. But even for the PMC, it's not easy, right? Like you're also being ground down by boss demands and this and that, right? So again, if people understood that, class politics are for you. When you struggle for public goods, it is not just for the great unwashed or the poor. It will make your life better as well. Like there is something that can be done to alleviate your situation. And I think why it feels so dark and hopeless is that there is that the solution is a solution that lies in class politics, right? So again, I just think the hopelessness comes from the explanation that like change yourself or time management more or nothing can be done. But actually there are struggles that can be done. But even for parents to be able to organize and struggle at a school for, like, the state needs to give you more stuff. You need to tax, we need to tax like the mall that's near my house more. Right? People can actually get their head around like, oh, this incredible, you know, ennui, this alienation I feel, the fact that I am snapping at this kid all the time. Because believe me, and I'm guilty of this, if you have driven all those hours and you have sat there, right, you are going to get very annoyed with this child who's also whining and annoyed because they've had a hell of a long day. Like, I notice how these tournaments, I'm like, how can you drive a kid to play soccer for 5 hours? Right? If that the answer to your predicament, there is one that lies outside of you just being more efficient or your partner making more money or you going out and getting a partner to, that there's things that you can struggle for that people have. And I think people get very hopeful when they actually realize there is a way out of my predicament. Or there's even a framework to understand it, because most people think it's just all their fault. Being a Marxist and a mother has been a really interesting experience as, you realize like the degree to which so many of the issues are really well solved in the public arena, but you have as yet no avenue to get there. And everything you're told, from you know, Oprah magazine to Instagram or whatever, is how to better yourself. If you could just be better, you wouldn't be facing this. And you tend to do it to your kid. Like that's all that anxiety and pushing them to the better school. And if you do it right, you'll have a good life and you'll escape all of this. And as the kid knows, I mean, our kids look at us all the time. They're like, what do I want to do all that? You and dad work all the time. Yeah, we're telling you to go to school and study and do all this and go to great college. So why you can work as hard as we do and be annoyed all the time? Again, kids are not dumb.
No, they are not. No.
One thing I'll just say, then I think we need to talk about like alienation and declining expectations and whatnot, is that my working class parents had a better expectation of lifestyle than me, who is technically a class above them in the sociological standard. Like They could buy a home, even if it's a crappy home, but they could buy one. I would kill to be able to buy a crappy home now. Like, it would take me $40,000 in savings, which, you know, and I'm not poor. So like, it's not something you can easily do. And people, I do think, I often get frustrated in America because the internalization is pretty deep here. And I've spent a lot of time abroad, and I will often push back on people like, oh, America's uniquely stupid. Like, no, it's really not actually. But people have bought in and feel like this has been naturalized to the point, and that's where, you know, the uniquely stupid might feel like it's coming from. And one of the things I find fascinating is like the resentment over stuff like student loans. Now, I actually do have issues with like just blanketly forgiving student loans because it's not going to fix shit. Like, it'll fix it for one time for a certain group of people, but Biden won't have the power to even fix the loan system by that action. And I say this as a person who is, you know, the things that they use to help you when you get out of that, like you say you go on IBR, which I did for many, many years. I owe more now than when I started, and I haven't missed that many payments.
Damn.
All right, because I went on to income-based repayment and did what they said to do when you were a moderate low income earner when you first get out. And you just realize, oh, even at these subsidized rates, this is collecting 6% interest at like $60 a day. Like, so you just realize how insane it gets. I bring that up just because a lot of the reasons why people feel like this is impossible is, and also that people are resentful about it, because you do have a bunch of people who have survivor's guilt because they've gone through this, they've done it now. And this is something that I talk to people about. Like, most people from my class background actually end up being conservative if they move up at all, because you feel like you are the standard for which other people should be able to be, and you don't grudge your own luck. And that's a problem. I mean, like, you know, we can talk about this and like how reactionary, I mean, maybe I'm the wrong person to say this because I'm pale, but how reactionary certain, like, say, elite classes of minorities can be, because they, particularly to themselves, their own sub-demographic and class background both, because they feel like everybody could have done what they did, and they don't see they were complete luck in some of that situation, you know.
Oh God, yeah, that's definitely a problem. That's definitely a problem, and I think that's where those generational wars also come into play a little bit too, with an older group of people. Not all of them that definitely look back on the younger generation and go, well, why don't you just work harder? It's almost like Archie Bunker.
Yeah, and again, when people you don't have a strong structural understanding of how radically things have changed, right? Like, even when I went through school, being in my 50s, like, people were not indebted. Like, I went to an Ivy League school and my dad was able to pay for it reasonably, and I didn't come out with debt up to here. And my parents didn't have, it just wasn't a thing. I think, was it Clinton or somebody who deregulated the loan industry?
Or was it Obama?
No, it was
Clinton.
It was a bit before. Like, I feel like it sort of happened in the Clinton era, because when I was going through school, like, you know, graduated from high school in 87, college in 91, you could still reasonably think, we were told school debt is good debt, right? That the interest rates were, it changed radically, right? And that's not the sort of thing you're sitting there watching. So it is easy to fall into a, well, why don't you just do it like I did, or I took out loans? You don't actually. I can see it because I work at a university, so I can see the huge, massive difference, right? That between when I was in school in the 90s and what is happening now. But I don't entirely fault ordinary olds like myself. Like, if you don't have that longitudinal and that long view, it is harder to appreciate just how bad things have gotten. And of course, the rhetoric doesn't change, though. So the rhetoric still is, go to school, take out the loans that are necessary, make it through school, and you will have a good life. And I really don't believe that is.
I'll tell you guys a real story. I'll be honest. I will pull back a little bit of the real veil my daughter came down to visit me a month or so ago, and we had this talk, and then she didn't have a big breakdown fight. I was going to find another word to say it. It was a fight. She's 24, and it's partially me. I'm not the greatest dad person, but she had confessed something in this breakdown that really kind of effed my head up. She goes, "You and mom don't have a house." And I'm not like some of these people I know where if I don't make it, I can just go live in the backyard, back shed.
Yep.
And that's a concern. She's 23. And what we have or don't have, I wouldn't think would be a concern of hers. But even she sees options dwindling. And
Of course.
coincidentally enough, Varn and Zine, she does want to get into teaching. She's going to school right now.
Oh God,
to
you might want to have her talk to me. But I think a lot about this because I had to sit down with some of my leftist friends one day and be like, okay, I realize that you're income poor, but you could live with your family for 3 or 4 years or 5 years or 6 years. Yeah. And I couldn't. Just to put it to you like blatantly, I moved back in with my family twice. I slept on a couch in a house of 8 people. It's like less than 100,000 feet. So, I couldn't work or, and do that for very long. If I brought my then spouse with me, we had absolutely no space or privacy. So we had to make it work one way or the other, even if that meant doing sketchy shit. And I'm just like, so while I income wise understand why you feel this way, I do, you need to look at wealth. Unfortunately, now people are finally talking about that, but they're only talking about it in weird racial terms that like bracket out class differences again. So that's a whole different problem, but it's just like, the amount now, if you don't buy a house, like not just do you not have a place to camp out, if you don't buy a house in a fairly decent area, like my parents' house is still, even all this appreciation, their house is still not worth crap. Your kids pretty much cannot enter the housing market now unless they make a job that they can bank between $20,000 and $40,000 to just get a 10% minimum for a first-time homeowners. I mean, that's not in a city. That's like, my entire state right now, it's Utah. This is not a high-paying state. Like, the average home price here is $600K.
Woo!
Oh yeah.
Whoo! You know what's so funny, man? I working in the homeless shelter. I work with cats that actually started to save money. You work with a lot of people that are out of the prison system, and when they actually are like, I want to fly straight, I want to get my life right, they get real good with money. And I work with this guy, and he was like, I want to buy a house. And he knew I worked in finance when I was younger. He's like, Jason, can you help me and show me what I need to do? I'm start looking at houses. And I was like, okay. I mean, what have you saved? You said you saved a bunch of money. What you saved? He said, I saved 29,000. That's a lot of money to save.
Yeah.
He wasn't making 6 figures. And I looked at him and I said, check this out. That might cover your closing costs if you can find a 3% down FHA loan. And he was like,
which means you're going to take out another loan for the other 7%.
Yeah. He's like, I don't want to talk to you anymore. And I wasn't trying to be rude. I wasn't trying to crush anybody's dream, but there's just a reality. Again, I say this all the time. I'm not living in Mexico because I like surfing and tacos. I'm living in Mexico because I can't afford California. I can legitimately buy a house here.
And I mean, I think what your daughter was also speaking to is that so much of what a regular middle class lifestyle, it assumes that there are parents to do all kinds of things, right? So even to get that high paying job or whatever, you've done an unpaid internship. Like, or the people move the old, I'm going to move home with mom and dad, which assumes that there is a home with your extra bedroom and all of these things, right? To be launched into a middle class lifestyle, which was not the case for my parents who came here in the 60s, or for me who grew up in the 70s or 80s. But looking at my own kids and, you know, my sister's children, it is an extended adolescence of being pretty dependent on your parents, even if you're working super hard, right? To be able to be launched into adulthood. And we can see this with, you know, sociologists tell us the declining numbers of children that people are having, the delayed marriages, you know, happening again across the board, that really reflect this underlying economic condition.
Varn, do you have any words
I
as we
mean,
hit up to the hour?
you know, as a person who gave up a house not to screw someone else, you know, a cancer survivor in an unfortunate situation, and the options were to make them sell their home and split, and where we neither one of us could have bought a new house with it, actually, even with the appreciation, or to give it up and just, you know, ask for my part of the down payment back, which itself was messed up. It sent this spiraling since the things since out of my head, because what I had to do to get that house was to leave the country for 10 years, be a mercenary basically, in education. But still, I mean, I went and worked for the richest people in the world to save up and would like assuage my conscience by teaching poor kids in the rancheros. um, it's not possible to do unless you already have wealth in your line. And when I think about, like, even my parents who were poor, I mean, legitly poor, were able to scrounge up enough to get a shitty house that they've been able to actually survive off of refinancing and kind of screwing their financial future with that. But they at least could do that. Like when they got too many medical debts, they'd refinance their house, which was how a lot of lower middle class and middle class workers survived in the 90s. Actually, that was like the strategy. That's all over, and they now can't retire. You know, my mom's disabled, but my stepfather will die working. Um, it's something that I see, and yet I'm also really bitter myself because I was told to go and get this, you know, professional job, and you know, spend half of a mortgage 10 years ago on an education, um, and still see that, like, no, if I'd played by the normal rules that I was supposed to play by, I would have never even been able to do what I did. I had to get lucky. I had to go abroad. I had to be a total mercenary. And I am sometimes frustrated with leftists, frankly, who do not come from a background to see this. What they see is, and a lot of them are legitimately see this, they see that a lot of their upper middle class families are running out of money. And they're beginning to lose their assets in their home, but they still have something. And they're like, you know, their first job they took was when they were 28 years old or 31 years old or whatever. And I'm like, I was working at 15. So even in our sector, and a lot of these people are now formally, I would actually say a lot of them are even workers now. They've pretty much they've fallen out of their class they're from. But the world, you know, the habitats that they came from closed them off for this, and now they're shocked with the realization. And I think the other thing that I think is going to come out during COVID, and Pascal and I used to talk about this, is like some of these people are now getting the wealth from the houses from their parents because they died of COVID, or because their parents finally like freaked out and dropped out of the market and gave them their inheritance early. And that's going to sharpen the class divide amongst people under 40. So and I think we're going to see a lot of that too. I mean, I'm already seeing it in my cohort. So, It's going to be interesting. I have no idea what that's going to do to politics, but it's definitely real. But even middle class and upper middle class kids, a lot of them do not feel like they have a future. Like they just don't. Like
it's scary. My daughter made me. I don't want to say it should make me feel bad. I'll be honest. I felt bad, and I don't know how her mom feels about it. Her and I don't really talk, but it definitely made me think about, man, I was in a similar situation as her, but I had grandparents, or at least a grandmother that was a homeowner. So there was definitely a home in the family that I knew of. So the reality that home ownership is becoming more and more of a pipe dream. I've been saying this for the last few months. I think we are in a state of collapse. I don't think it's around the corner. I think we're in it. So there's no sign that says, hey, this is collapse. And how we navigate it is going to be extremely important. That being said.
And I just want to say one last thing. And isn't it horrible that a home, no human being can live without shelter, is more or less seen pretty much as a driver of wealth accumulation? Like this should be a basic human right. Like this is something you need as a human being. And just the barbarity of the fact that it is not only a commodity that made a commodity that's necessary to have anything in life, right? But it's just the way that housing shifts in a capitalist society, right? Like shifts to, we forget that the primary purpose of a home is that every human being needs a place to stay, right? I mean, it's like, so to me, it's so absolutely horrific. And again, most of our conversations.
Let's end on this very good note. I want to end on two good notes. First of all, can we admit that Varn and Zine came in and killed it?
Here it comes! Oh my God!
Even if we only technically talked about one news item.
Hey, brother, we got the whole champagne room. And I also want to give you guys some good news. I saw in the San Francisco Chronicle today that Mayor London Breed was going to dump $67 million into permanent supportive housing, which is something we talked about on the show on Tuesday. For whatever reason, people didn't want to watch that show. I don't know why. Go back and watch it. Our show, Pascal and I did with our very good friend Randy Shaw, who also we found out was a friend of Adolph Reed as well. I hit Randy up. I was like, hey, Randy, I saw this in the paper. What is this? He goes, well, we have been pushing for more money. And the Chronicle wrote a nasty hit piece that Randy was basically on here to defend himself on. And they got 15 million, or they should be getting some just for them. And one of their projects, they took over 100-year-old buildings, and they're dealing with a cohort that a lot of people probably shouldn't be alone in these buildings. They need a lot of supervision. And they do a phenomenal job over there at in the Tenderloin in San Francisco. So shout out to Randy Shaw. Oh, sorry, that was the wrong sound bank. Almost said the wrong one. Shout out to Randy Shaw and all the cats over there in the Tenderloin supportive housing. They did it. He didn't tweet about it. They actually had an on-the-ground movement of people in the community, unhoused people in the community, putting enough pressure on politicians that they got the money that they needed. So on that note, we are heading into the champagne room. If you do not have champagne room access and you would like champagne room access, become a patron. If you are a patron of Derick Varn, you can have champagne room access for this show. Derick, I will send you the link out so you can share it on your Patreon as well, because that's what comrades do. If you want access to either Varn's champagne room or this champagne room, I don't care where you go. Just please go and try to get access. We want to have a very crowded champagne room tonight. We don't want the exclusivity. There's only one way to do it. Well, with me, there is. I can't speak for that motherfucker. But it's patreon.com/bitterlake presents. For as little as $30 for the year, you can have all the champagne room access. And Varn, what is your Patreon?
Price or where it's at. Varn Vlog at Patreon, and price. I have a cheap thing for $3, and that gives you access to this kind of stuff. And I have a $10 level for those who want to actually make me do work. So they actually get to tell me what I have to research by votes. So, I try to. If you're a Patreon for $3, I will throw you guys this link. You can come watch us. So that's about 250 people. So,
and also, I put a link to Zine's latest piece in Nonsite. She came on the show almost a month ago to talk about that piece. It didn't come out till a while afterwards, but there is a link to that piece in the description of the show. Thank you guys so much. Please enjoy the capitalist realism of my youth over a beat I made for my 3-year-old.